Absolutely. And our guests are here. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. His Excellency Reuven Azar, Ambassador of Israel, who is going to be in conversation with Navika Kumar.
Thank you, Hina. Thank you, Swati. And it's my pleasure to welcome on stage the indomitable Miss Ambassador Reuven Azar, a man who's known to speak his mind, minces no words, and loves his straight talk. So from the word go, no prizes for guessing. Everybody is asking right now the question on where do we stand on the conflict in West Asia.
Well, first of all, congratulations for 20 years for Times Now. I know you've been part of this great endeavor, and you've been doing a great job. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. Look, we are at a critical point, a critical juncture here, because this has been a very straightforward proposal from the part of the United States, which is in complete sync with us. And we have to wait and see whether the regime is going to engage with it seriously, or that we'll have to go to the next military stage of the operation.
President Trump has spoken about the fact that there will be a 5-day pausing of any attacks on Iran's power plants. As of now, do you see that happening? Do you see any progress in the so-called conversation that is on, and is Israel on board in this entire process?
Well, as I said, yes, we are in sync with the United States, and I think that the entire world has been able to see by now the 15-point plan that include the aims that we have put forward at the outset of this operation. That means removing permanently the existential threats that were coming from this regime, the military nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, and also the support for the terrorist organizations in the region. So if these conditions are met, I think there is a great opportunity for the Iranians to get rid of sanctions and to embark in what the Iranian people need, some development. Because the entire lives of the Iranian people has been hijacked to serve these fanatical aims of the regime, to destroy the state of Israel, to terrorize countries in the region. That's completely unacceptable, and that's what brought, after decades of negotiation, is that agenda that brought us so far. So I hope that that will change.
Have you achieved the requisite objectives of regime change that you started out with 4 weeks ago?
Well, we were very clear at the outset that what we want to do is not to invade Iran or impose a certain political order there, but what we want to do is to give a chance to the Iranian people that have been killed by the tens of thousands only a few weeks back to embrace their future, to sort of work to degrade the oppression capability of this terrible regime that not only has been killing, innocent protesters, they have been chasing them into hospitals and killing them in bed. This is a kind of conduct that is completely unacceptable. And we know that the Iranian people, are celebrating, despite the fact that there's no internet in Iran right now. From time to time, you see these videos of people celebrating the American and Israeli attacks because they want to have hope. And I think that we are giving them that hope. Now, whether they are indeed going to have the courage to fight this regime, that's a good question because, it's not easy. We take freedom for granted because we live in free countries. But when you have to stand up to such a degree of cruelty, it's very hard.
But then bombing of a school where children are killed, is that the solution?
No, of course not. And you know very well, there's been a lot of, first of all, any death of innocents is deplorable, is tragic, but this has been the exception, not the rule. We've been targeting thousands and thousands of military targets, and sometimes in wars, things like that can happen, but this is not the intention that we have, unlike what we are seeing from this regime. They are firing mainly at Israeli civilian targets with cluster bombs. Okay, they are firing at civilian installations in the Gulf. So they have been, after us for the kill. And they don't differentiate. We do differentiate. We would have preferred not to do this operation. Israelis want to go back to their lives. They don't want to keep busy in attacking countries that are 2,000 kilometers away. But we found ourselves in this situation because, in the last few decades, Navika, every bullet and every rocket and every terrorist attack and every cyber attack has been coming somehow from Iran, because the regime has been either financing terrorists, they have been training terrorists, transferring technologies for weapons of mass destruction, and we've exhausted all the possible tools that we had, diplomatically and otherwise, to try to deal with that. But unfortunately, we have gotten to a situation in which their plan to exterminate us has reached a level that we would have lost the possibility to deal with. And then, therefore, we had to take action now.
Was there an imminent nuclear threat from Iran? Is the question many are asking. The answer so far has not been a categorical one. How would you state the situation, the intelligence that you got?
Yeah, so I want to make it very clear, because people, don't know the details and sometimes get confused because of disinformation. Back in June, when we attacked alone for the first time, we did it because we knew out of intelligence, we invested billions of dollars just in order to know what's going on there, because our country doesn't have the strategic depth to sustain a nuclear attack. So we invested a lot of resources just to know what's going on. And the reports we had then is that the regime has decided to sneak out to a nuclear weapon, to a nuclear arsenal, actually. We shared this information with, the information was shared to our government, to our opposition, to the Americans, and we decided that we have to take action before they do that, okay? Now, what happened, and we neutralized the threat. But what happened since then is that the Iranian regime decided that they are going to take all these capabilities very deep underground. So even the buster bombs that the Americans had wouldn't be able to reach them, okay? So it's not that this time they were weeks from a nuclear weapon, because we neutralized that back in June. But the decision and the preparations to take everything underground, including the ballistic missile production, gave us no choice but to act now, because then it wouldn't have been possible. And this is how you deal with existential threats. It's not that, this is a war of choice, that we could do it whatever we can. No. It's not easy for us. We are after 2.5 years of war. This is the longest war in the history of Israel. And we would be glad, to go back to our normal lives. But unfortunately, this is a matter of life and death for us.
Well, normal life is something the entire world is looking forward to. But the question many are also asking is Israel on board in the peace talks? Did President Trump consult Prime Minister Netanyahu before he made his statement of a 5-day ceasefire and the accompanying peace talks? Were you on board?
We are completely in sync with the United States. We are talking with them every day. We share the aims of this operation. We actually, for the first time in history, are conducting a joint military operation, which, by the way, wouldn't have been possible whether we wouldn't have signed the Abraham Accords and if we wouldn't have this possibility to act together with CENTCOM over the skies of the region, in sync, by the way, with the armies of the countries of the Gulf. So we are defending the skies together. We are, I think, sharing the interest also with these countries, because they also sense this existential threat coming from Iran. And without neutralizing it, the future of this region would be hijacked by this regime. And that's, that has also implications on India, because to a certain extent, the Gulf with 10 million Indians is an extension of India. And anything that you want to do, in the future, to not only to develop cooperation, but actually to implement the very serious set of agreements that India has signed with the major blocks of trade in the last year. You need to have this area free from threats that can undermine everything that you are planning.
Which is true, but you say there are no differences, you're completely on board with America, but on the issue of attacks on Iran's energy installations, including South Pars, there seems to be absolutely different positions that President Trump took from the position of Israel. In fact, he said, I told him, that is Prime Minister Netanyahu, don't do that, and he won't do that. He said this in the Oval Office. So some communication lines get jammed even when the Israelis are handling them.
Look, I'm laughing because in Israel, we are, the relations with the United States is so important that people are looking for the gaps in the morning.
There are gaps.
There are
you
some
will
gaps.
confess.
They look at it in the morning, at noon, in the afternoon, in the evening, and if they find something, it's a crisis. I think people are overstating that. You always have, from time to time, some gaps. We can narrow them. It's not a big deal. And again, it's the exception that doesn't show the rule, okay?
So you do admit some gaps do exist. So energy installations being targeted, was that a plan from the beginning that was known to the US? Or was that an Israeli plan, number one? And number two, did you expect the retaliation from Iran that we've seen?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into operational things because, first of all, I don't know them. I'm not exposed to all the operational aspects. But I think, again, this is a gap that is not significant. When you have a joint military operation, you are basically coordinating everything, okay? Now, when it comes to the Iranian retaliation, I think it's very interesting to talk about that because, yes, the Iranians have expanded in a very brutal way the scope of the conflict by attacking those countries they were calling their friends and by disturbing the supply of energy to countries that they continue to call their friends. So it makes you wonder what kind of friends you have, okay?
But when a nation is pushed against the wall, my question is whether you anticipated it or whether you thought this operation would be a 4-day operation in and out.
We knew that the regime has this, they have threatened in the past to take over the Straits of Hormuz or to try to police them. This is not news. We knew that, we know that for decades now. I'm not, into the intelligence papers that were actually trying to, say what exactly is going to happen or not. I think it could be, it was in the cards that the Iranian regime would implement trying to implement their threat. But this is not the important question. I think that the important question is whether we are going to cooperate with this kind of extortion or the international community is going to stand in a firm way and say, look, the fact that you had produced this conflict with Israel and the United States, this is not the responsibility of the rest of the world. So I was encouraged to a certain extent that, first of all, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution condemning Iran, and that finally, after a few days of hesitation, you have a pretty big group of a couple dozen of countries that are ready in the future to engage in securing the maritime navigation in the Straits. So we'll have to see to what extent countries that have skin in the game are willing to participate, because so far we have been doing most of the heavy lifting, especially the Americans.
So let me ask you, Israeli media is reporting that Trump might have floated an April 9 deadline to end the war. Can you confirm this?
No, I cannot confirm it. Look,
earlier?
I don't know. Look, it's very clear to everybody that this is a genuine attempt by the United States to try to end this war before more damage is caused to the interest of mainly the regime, but also the rest of the international community. So they've been acting quite responsibly when it comes to the energy markets, because we have entered this situation with, I think, with more energy resources than were here like a couple of years back. And therefore, the spike we are seeing now is pretty minimal compared to, for example, the crisis you had in the 70s, in which the prices of oil went up 400%. So they are looking at this with a lot of flexibility in order to minimize damage to friends. So here the United States, I think, is acting much more responsibly than the Iranian regime. And we hope that thanks to that responsible behavior, we'll be able either to finish this conflict earlier, and if not, to continue to show the resolve that is needed in order not only to neutralize the conflict, but neutralize the threats, but also to give us a chance for a region that is not as threatened as it is so far.
So let me ask you, America has been mobilizing its forces and sending troops to the Middle East, 3,000 at the last count that we've heard about. Is it a prelude to a ground intervention, and is Israel in favor of that in Iran?
Well, what do you think? Iran is a country that is bigger than France and Germany combined. So I don't think that you can do a ground invasion of an entire country like Iran with 3,000 soldiers. Okay, so I think that we are more this leverage that is being created. First of all, is sending a very clear signal that this operation can continue, and that would be detrimental for the regime. But also that the United States has still many military options ahead, and we have said also in the outset that we don't discard a scenario in which commando forces from this sort or the other would be used to gain certain targets, certain gains of certain targets. So it's not out of the question.
I want to ask you, is Pakistan really mediating between the two sides, US and Israel on one side, Iran on the other? What's your position on that?
Well, people tend to overstate the term mediation, because mediation can be many things. Mediations can be facilitation, can be, sending messages, hosting a meeting. It can also be that you have a stake in the game, that you are capable of rewarding somebody or taking something from anybody. I think that it's too early to determine that. And what is interesting to everybody to contemplate is, we've seen the United States during the Gaza war, how they actually used their leverage over players that were very negative from our perspective. The sponsors of terrorism like Qatar and Turkey, supporters of Hamas. They exerted leverage on them to deliver an agreement from Hamas to bring back all our hostages. Okay? So sometimes you cannot discard a situation that somebody that you don't like will play a positive role from the point of view of a dynamic that you want to achieve. I'm not praising that country because I think that they've been very responsible, especially when it comes to supporting terrorism, that we know this is something that neither you or us are very, we like. On the contrary, and it's deplorable. But at the end of the day, we have to see how this plays out. We have to give credit to the President of the United States to deliver what he wants to deliver, because it's in the common interest, not only of the United States and Israel. I think it's in the common interest of the entire international community, because we don't want to live under the shadow of another rogue nuclear state.
But the fact is that the conflict of the West Asian region is also having long-term ramifications for the rest of the world, especially as far as the oil and energy supply chains are concerned, which is why the war and the conflict is going on between probably three countries, but the heat is being felt by the rest of the world. When and how do you think the situation in the Straits of Hormuz is going to get to a situation where the world can carry on with its normal life? Well,
first of all, let's talk about the long-term ramifications. Because, yes, there are repercussions as a result of this operation, and I don't tend to sideline or underestimate the fact that people have to pay more for energy at this point, or that might be choke points. But the real long-term ramifications on the stability of West Asia are at stake in the context of what this regime represents and what they want to do. Okay? We don't want a situation in which a rogue state like Iran will have nuclear weapons. It will be able to destroy any country in the region within seconds with tens of thousands of ballistic missiles and hundreds of thousands of drones. We don't want that kind of capability to be in the hands of a fanatical, theocratic, radical Islamic regime that actually has the capability, as we saw only a few days back, to hit targets at more than 4,000 kilometers. That covers the entire European continent, it covers India, it covers a pretty large chunk of the world. So we don't want to have that, because not only that we will be under a huge threat, but also the prospects of stability of the energy markets and the prospects of projects of connectivity through West Asia are very slim if this situation continues. So we will be able to recover when it comes to the energy markets. We have all the tools, especially after the United States has ramped up their energy production, after they have flipped back Venezuela, and all the Venezuelan oil is going to be refined in the American refineries. We are actually doing something that at the end of the day is going to open up many opportunities for economic cooperation. These are the long-term ramifications. Now, yes, we're going to have a challenge when it comes to the Straits of Hormuz, and we have to see how it's going to play out. It's not something that that is insignificant.
Well, we have to survive this to be able to look at the long-term ramifications. Right. And as things are looking today, people who are looking at either oil markets or stock markets across the world literally have their hearts in their mouths. But if peace has to be given a chance, there are conditions that even Iran has put forth, and they have asked for a halt of aggression and assassinations. Will you heed to this demand that has come before any significant attempt at peace talks can even begin?
Well, first of all, what I learned from their response is that they are actually negotiating, because they are saying that they are not negotiating. So evidently, if you respond to an offer that is being given by one side, it means that you are negotiating. And that in itself is encouraging, because it means that they are under pressure and they feel the need to engage with the United States. That's number one. Now, of course, some of the demands that they have is completely ridiculous. Nobody is going to compensate them for the crimes they have committed against the world and against their own people. But when you look at the 15 points plan of President Trump, you can see very clearly that there is a very serious sanctions relief and other things that are included there that actually give hope for the people of Iran to actually, come out of this conflict with a lot of opportunities. So there is a lot at stake, not only on the negative side, for the Iranian side, and we have to see whether this, the current people that are managing right now the regime are going to be, blind to that, or because of the fact that they have been digging in, they are going to be incapable of delivering it to their own people, the people that are actually managing the IRGC, the Basij forces. And if they fail, I think that the situation will be much worse for them.
Do you think you're ready for the long haul in Lebanon?
Look, with Lebanon, we are in a situation in which we had a very, very clear terms of a ceasefire that we gained last year with a political change in Lebanon, a government that said that it is committed to dismantle Hezbollah, but unfortunately it was unwilling or incapable of doing so. And we found ourselves one day after we started the operation with a renewed attack that came unilaterally from Hezbollah. So we are dealing with that now. We have taken advanced positions in South Lebanon in order to avoid a situation in which Hezbollah forces can fire anti-tank missiles or invade our northern cities or northern communities. But it remains to be seen what else we can do in order to change the situation for the long term and actually get the international community to help the Lebanese government to execute what they are saying they want to do. Because right now, Hezbollah is still a force that is unchallenged in Lebanon, despite all the statements. So we've seen, for example, a pretty brave move by the foreign minister of Lebanon to actually not accept the new Iranian ambassador, who is the ambassador of the IRGC. Okay? But this is not enough. We need to, if we want to have a sustainable peace with Lebanon, with which we have a zero conflict, we will have to somehow create a situation in which the Iranian regime is not calling the shots in that country, but actually the Lebanese people can embrace their future and advance their own interests, their own domestic interests, and not the interests of the Iranian regime.
So let me ask you, when you started off with this conflict, there was a specific objective as far as regime change was concerned. Do you think you have achieved those objectives, number one? And number two, President Trump has often referred to the fact that in the present regime, the supreme leader has been injured to an extent where he may be decapacitated. What is your intelligence on that?
Well, we don't know what is the exact situation of that person. I think that, even in a scenario that we don't achieve an agreement, we will finish this operation with very clear results. First of all, we are going to be able, and we are already achieving it, not only to neutralize, but to take back their nuclear and ballistic missile programs many years back, and we would debilitate this regime to the extent that it would be very difficult for it to recover. And that means that the prospects of either change in the regime or regime change would be there. I remind you, we didn't say at the beginning that we are going to achieve a regime change. We are going to open the way. At the end of the day, it's up to the Iranian people to decide whether they are capable or they are going to do it. Right now, they are still at home, and they are continue to be terrorized. I saw the videos yesterday of Basij people firing with live fire at windows of people that were screaming with joy of IRGC targets being bombarded around Iran. So the prospects of change in Iran are there, and the potential is there. But it's very difficult at this point to determine, as it was at the outset. We said that necessarily this is going to happen now. It's the process. I think at the end of the day that every tyranny that is working against the interests of the people, one day it will fall. When that is going to happen, it's a good question.
India, you say, is a friend, and India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to both sides and has shown his interest in de-escalation. What would your answer be to the people of India on the issue of de-escalation and India's request in this matter?
Well, I think that it's it's only natural, it's completely also legitimate that for a country that is the let's say, biggest rising economy in the world today, like India, that would seek stability, that would seek conditions that will allow this process of rapid rise in the economy to continue. And we've seen that as a result of that, even India itself, despite the threats that it has been very keen to shorten the time of conflict so you can go back to building the country as you deserve and you're entitled to. What we are saying is that, look, we had to do this because it was an existential threat against us. We didn't have any choice. And that eventually what is going to contribute in the long term for the continued rise of India is a West Asia that is free from these threats. And that's the answer. You have to a certain extent, trade the short period to the longer view. And I am very optimistic that we will achieve this debilitation of the Iranian regime, and at the end of the day, this will be very conducive to the interests of India in the long term.
Well, Ambassador Azar, in the end, for our audience and for the Indian people who are watching Times Now tonight, I just want to ask you one question. When do you expect this conflict to come to an end? A simple answer that people can understand.
Well, I think we have a window now. I hope that the Iranian regime coincides with a common interest to bring this to a close, and then I think this can end very soon. If they refuse, because it's not only up to us, then this can continue for a few more weeks.
On that note, hoping for peace to prevail, because whenever there is a war or a conflict, it is citizens and innocent civilians also who pay a huge price.
Including Israelis, by the way.
Absolutely, every country across the world without any qualification suffers from wars. We would like peace to prevail in the world for every single country, every single citizen of the world. Thank you very much, Ambassador Azar, for joining me at the Times Now Summit and sharing your views with us.